There's one wood-boring insect that needs a special attention and a treatment all its own, and that is the emerald ash borer. This insect has an ability to damage shade trees in a manner that is far more serious than any of the other wood borers we could be discussing, and also the ways that we manage it are going to be different. Now, the emerald ash borer gets its name because it is a green-colored beetle, emerald-colored beetle, and it develops on ash trees. Ash trees meaning the genus Fraxinus. So we're talking green ash, white ash, which are quite commonly planted as street trees and in yards and parks here in Colorado. It is a native to Asia and was introduced accidentally into the United States, probably on packing material or some other wood item that contained living stages of the larvae, and was first detected in the United States in 2002 in the Detroit area. It has since spread rapidly throughout North America and presently is found in some 23 states and 2 Canadian provinces, and in the areas where it has been associated for the longest periods of time in the upper Midwest, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, there has been extraordinary damage been done by this insect that continues. So its presently known distribution is illustrated in the map right here on the upper right, and you can see that Colorado is the farthest west extension of this insect. It was detected here in 2013. The distribution, again, has rapidly extended. You can see from a map in 2010 the infested counties to 2016. If you compare these two, very fast spread. Most of this is from human movement of infested material. Some of this is from the flight of the insect itself moving when the adult form is out and about. But human spread of this has greatly contributed to the problem we have at present and will always be associated with this problem. So the emerald ash borer is a type of flat-headed borer. It's in the family Buprestidae, metallic wood borer, flat-headed borers, Agrylus planopennis. It's in the same genus as several of the kinds of flat-headed borers that we have, such as bronze birch borer, honey locust borer, or gamble oak borer. It is associated just with ash, and we've also had, for a long period of time, another kind of borer in ash, one that is in the clearwing borer family, known as the lilac ash borer. So we have 2 kinds of borers now that we're talking about in ash trees, and these are not at all equal in terms of their importance in terms of tree health. So maybe a review of these 2 insects, the lilac ash borer and the emerald ash borer, is appropriate to understand how these are different and to reinforce the differences between these kinds of wood-boring insects, metallic wood borer versus a clearwing borer. So the lilac ash borer is in the clearwing borer family, and we compare the way that the larvae develop between these two. An emerald ash borer is a flat-headed borer. It's going to create meandering tunnels in the cambium that produce girdling wounds. So their attacks are just underneath the bark. Attacks can occur throughout the crown and start usually on the top of the tree. And then as the population increases, you get more and more of the cambium tissue destroyed, causing a collapse of the tree at the end stages, since it's unable to move nutrients efficiently and it's been compromised through all the extensive tunneling that we see. Lilac ash borer creates a different kind of wound. It is this irregular gouging. It's not the nice, neat cambium feeding that we see with a flat-headed borer, and almost always it is concentrated at the lower trunk, below the first scaffold limb, and often right at the base of the trunk. Now, the emerald ash borer is a type of beetle, metallic wood borer beetle, and beetles, when they emerge from a tree after they have pupated behind the bark, can chew, because the adult beetles can chew. So they will chew, and they will chew a hole, an exit hole, that is in the form that is the shape of their body in cross section. And a metallic wood borer larva, a metallic wood borer adult, has a kind of flat area on the back, and the underside of the body is more convex. So they produce what's called a D-shaped exit hole that they produce from chewing. Whereas the lilac ash borer is a type of moth, and moths cannot chew, so all the chewing has to be done by the larva. The larva chews and leaves just a little window for the adult to push its way through when it does emerge. It pupates just behind that little window, and the adult emerges, often pulling out the pupal skin, the extruded pupal skin, and producing a hole that is sort of roundish, maybe irregularly round. The emerald ash borer, EAB, is the moniker for emerald ash borer, usually emerges sometime in mid to late May and is present for the next couple of months. And they will be laying most eggs in June through July. Prior to egg laying, the adults go through a period of feeding on the leaves of ash trees. So there is a pre-period when the adult insect is chewing on the leaves. They are maturing their eggs at this time, and then subsequently they will then lay the eggs on the bark, and the larvae will then hatch from those eggs and move into the tree. So there's a couple of week period after the adults emerge that is involved in foliage feeding on the ash trees. On the other hand, lilac ash borer, being a moth, does not chew in the adult stage, so they do not feed in the adult stage. Furthermore, they come out quite early. Lilac ash borer adults are usually found in mid to late spring, and most eggs that these lay are laid in May or early June. Most of their egg laying is done by the time the emerald ash borer is going to lay its eggs. Also, there is a way that we can very readily detect the lilac ash borer and when it's out and about, and that's through the use of pheromone traps. In the picture on the lower right, we see a male of the lilac ash borer heading into a pheromone baited trap. We have excellent traps to monitor the flight period and the adult activity of this insect. Unfortunately, there are no highly effective traps for detecting activity at adult stages of the emerald ash borer. Now, eggs of both species are going to be laid on the bark of the host tree. Unlike a round-headed borer, a longhorn beetle, they're not going to chew into the tree to insert an egg underneath the bark. The eggs are going to be exposed on the bark, be it an emerald ash borer or be it a clearwing borer. Now, where these two borers on ash break out is in how damaging they are to this kind of host, how aggressive they are, and if you were to make a scale of how aggressive insects are on various kinds of trees and shrubs and make it a 1 to 10 scale, where 10 would be the most aggressive insects, the ones that are most capable of overcoming healthy trees that can't defend themselves well for some reason or another. The lilac ash borer is probably pretty far down on the low end. It's a 2, maybe a 3. It is pretty much limiting its attacks to trees that have some issue. They are in a poor site. They're growing along the street. They are a recently transplanted tree, which is quite susceptible to this insect. But in terms of killing trees, lilac ash borer rarely kills trees, and almost never is an issue in a tree once it has been well established. Contrast that with the emerald ash borer, and the emerald ash borer now defines a tree-killing insect in North America. It is the most aggressive wood-boring insect we have in this continent at this time. It is fully capable of taking out very healthy plants, very healthy trees, usually within about 5 years after it has originally begun attack on that tree. You get enough accumulated injuries in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years that the trees will be killed. That has been its track record in North America that we have seen particularly evidenced in those areas that have had this insect for now over a decade, where it is killing millions of trees annually. Emerald ash borer is devastating to all species of ash, Fraxinus, that are native to North America. Again, that's green ash, such as Marshall seedless ash, that's white ash, such as autumn purple ash, as well as other species that are found in areas of the country, black ash, found in northern wetland areas, blue ash. All these are native species of ash in North America, and emerald ash borer is devastating to all of them. Some degree a little less, some species a little more, but it is very damaging to North American species of ash. Now, emerald ash borer is an introduced species that's native to Asia, and this is why we have this special issue. There are ash trees that are native to Asia, and emerald ash borer is not a problem where those trees are grown. It is a minor insect. The trees there have resistance. The trees there also have help from to fight off this insect, because there are natural enemies that are present that also attack emerald ash borer. It's not a pest insect in Asia because Asian ash has evolved resistance to this insect. It is a problem now, a big problem in North America, where it has never been found before. So basically, why is EAB so destructive to ash trees in North America? North American ash species lack the ability to resist emerald ash borer. They have not evolved the ability to resist this insect, as has Asian ash. And as a result, we are seeing a loss of trees that is pretty much unprecedented in the history of this continent, caused by an invasive species of tree-killing organism. There have been some very serious other previous pests that have been introduced in North America that have forever changed the ecology of this continent. The best documented early situation involved a fungus that produced chestnut blight, and this devastated American chestnut in the early 1900s. American chestnut was a keystone species in the eastern hardwood forest, and chestnut blight came in and destroyed this plant. It is essentially gone from the landscape. In the more recent memory of many people, still in the memory of many people, when Dutch elm disease first came into North America. This is a disease that is also caused by a fungus. It does happen to have a beetle that is assisting in its movement from tree to tree, but when Dutch elm disease came in, it took out American elm, which was at one time the most important boulevard tree, the most important shade tree that was used over wide areas of North America. It was also a very common tree that grew along the rivers in riparian corridors. And Dutch elm disease has essentially eliminated this plant, American elm, from broad areas of the United States, making it far less common in its occurrence and almost never used, except in some areas, such as Colorado, as a street tree anymore. Emerald ash borer is going to be worse than either of those two. It will functionally eliminate a genus of plants, Fraxinus, white ash, green ash, black ash, and again, the track record indicates that within about 5 years after it gets into a tree and builds up enough of a population so it will kill the tree, and the trees will die from the accumulated effects of this insect developing underneath the bark. So these are dead trees here in an Indiana picture, and trees on the right that are so far advanced that they are not going to be capable of being turned around. And then what we see are broad expanses where ash is no longer going to be living. It's going to be killed. Now, ash is unfortunately somewhere between 15 to 20% of the street trees that grow in much of this part of the country. So this is going to have a huge effect. It is not a tree that grows in wild areas as a native plant, so we don't have the reservoirs and the forests that are also going to be devastated in this part of the country. But as a street tree problem, it's going to be enormous. And typically, the way emerald ash borer moves into an area and causes damage is indicated in this graph here, again from Indiana, Purdue, where basically we see incremental effects of the insect developing over time. It develops kind of in a logarithmic level where it kind of starts out slowly as the insect gets established and reproduces and doubles maybe, and then doubles and doubles, and pretty soon you have enormous numbers. And at that point you start to see massive death. So typically you're going to see a crest of damage occurring 5, 6, 7 years after that first gets into an area, into a city, when you get massive tree loss. And if this is not managed in an appropriate way before that time, you have a huge problem in terms of how do you get rid of all the dead trees that you're going to have to deal with. How do you replace them? So there's a lot of things we need to do here to prevent taking a lot of things we have to do to anticipate the kind of problems we're going to have and take appropriate steps so that we can mitigate the kind of damage and kind of parcel it out over time so we're not seeing a huge loss of trees all at once. So that's the area where we have to try to damp it down its impact in terms of the urban forest and the losses that are going to be caused. So again, just for the Colorado example, we joined the Emerald Ash Borer Club in September 2013 when a positive tree was detected in Boulder, in central part of Boulder. The actual suspected area now, where we think it was originally introduced, was a few miles to the south from where the original tree that was found to be affected. It was probably established in Boulder sometime 5, 6, 7 years before this time. So we're talking maybe 2006, 2007, 2008 when it got in, and it took a while before it started to kill a tree that attracted attention that allowed us to identify that it had been here. So again, when you look at a distribution map of emerald ash borer in North America, Colorado is the outlier. We are the only western state that currently has this. The previous area of infestation where this occurred was in the Kansas City area, in the border of Kansas and Missouri. But we didn't get it from Kansas and Missouri. We probably got it from somewhere in the upper Midwest. Again, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago maybe. Somebody living in Ohio, living in Michigan, living in Ontario, or living in Indiana, decided to come to Colorado and brought some wood with them, some firewood. And that firewood was ash, and it had developing stages of the emerald ash borer. And they drove it out here, drove it past the treeless high plains where there are no ash, where the insect could not have crossed on its own, crossed all those wheat fields and all those corn fields where again there was no ash and where the insect could not have crossed on its own. Got past the deer and the antelope playing here in Colorado and drove right in and parked somewhere in Boulder, and the insects escaped from that wood. So maybe the wood was taken out of the car or whatever and piled somewhere. The adult insects escaped, established an infestation, and that's how this thing moves around the country. The current area within Boulder where this insect has been found so far is indicated in this map. This is as of April 2016. So we see the essential, the central area of Boulder gridded out into various 1 mile grids, and all of those that have colors in them are ones that have been infested in 2013, 2014, 2015. The green dots in this picture are ash that are part of the city property. So it has steadily extended its known range within Boulder at this point in time. And this is where it was first introduced in the state. Now, where emerald ash borer has become introduced elsewhere, it has been able to spread throughout the state. I do think it's going to be different in Colorado. I do think it's going to be different in other western states in terms of how it will move, because in this part of the country we have geographic compartmentalization. We have areas that are defined by mountain ranges. We have areas that are defined by large areas without ash, that is what's needed to support this insect. And often cities are quite widely spread without a lot of ash in between them. So I think the movement of ash borer, emerald ash borer in the western U.S. is going to be different from the way it is in other parts of the country. And I think the best way to think about how it will get established and the regions of infestation are by river drainages. River drainages are usually defined by geographic features like mountain ranges. So the current infestation in Colorado, in Boulder, is an infestation of an area that is the South Platte River drainage that also extends up into Cheyenne and parts of Nebraska. This is an area that is, again, defined by geographic barriers. To the west, to the Rocky Mountains. To the south, you have other barriers that would prohibit it from moving. So I would say that we are infested as a state, but only the part of the state that is at risk from the current infestation is the South Platte drainage. And again, that will also increase risk to the areas in Wyoming and Nebraska that are also part of this drainage. So in the next 5 years, emerald ash borer will steadily move out of where it is. It'll move out on its own through the adults flying, when they fly in May, June, July, or it'll move out from human-assisted spread. And I think we can be confident that this will pretty much colonize most of the South Platte drainage within 10 years. When we look at the map of how emerald ash borer has spread in the United States and into Canada since 2002, I think it is easy to make the assumption that Colorado, at least the northeast part of Colorado, and areas that are also within this drainage may likely be infested within 10 years. How is it going to spread on its own? It's going to spread through windblown dispersal of adults. And the peak period when the adults are out is late May through July. They fly some on their own. When they find an ash tree, they'll pretty much likely stay there, but given the right kind of wind conditions, they might move long distances, many miles. It's also going to be spread by buttheads, jerks that move wood containing developing stages, and that's always going to be a problem. I think it is interesting to speculate on how it might spread and the rate of spread that might occur naturally by looking at the kind of wind patterns that come out of the currently infested area. When we look at the weather map that shows wind directions that have been recorded in Boulder in May through August, if all we're looking at is wind directions, and this is from 4 years data during May through August, you see actually that most of the winds move to the west, move out of Boulder into the foothills where there are some ash in those locations, but those are areas that are not the high density population centers with most of the ash. If we make a different kind of map and add another feature to it, so we have both wind direction and how strong the winds are, though we get a slightly different pattern. And we do see that often there are strong winds that are heading down in the southeast direction, which would hit places like Superior Westminster, ultimately Denver. So I think wind-blown dispersal does show that, or wind direction patterns in that area does indicate that probably on its own this insect will likely move most readily to the southeast direction rather than to the northeast direction. But how far away is emerald ash borer from your community or any community? It's just one truckload away, just one piece of wood. Some jerk brings a piece of wood infested with larvae, ash firewood, and then leaves it somewhere at a time when the adults come out and that town is infested. So what are the control options that are being developed and considered for managing emerald ash borer? Well, there's a variety of things that are considered for managing any kind of insect. Maybe cultural controls, in this case host plant resistant, biological controls, insecticide treatments. One of the things that often is raised is, well, what about using Asian species of ash that have resistance? There are resistant ash that are known to occur that do not are not highly susceptible to emerald ash borer, such as Manchurian ash. Not a native species, but a species that grew up and has evolved resistance to emerald ash borer. Well, that makes sense, I guess, if you want to plant ash, if you want to continue to plant ash, and emerald ash borer is so destructive to ash trees in North America because North American ash species lack ability to resist emerald ash borer because it's not native to North America. So the thinking would then go that you plant an Asian ash, I guess, if you still wanted to have ash, and it would be Manchurian ash, but turns out Asian species of ash are highly susceptible to the North American borer, the lilac ash borer. So you're going to have more problems with lilac ash borer in these Asian species. So perhaps until this whole emerald ash borer deal gets worked out regionally, probably we should just not even think about ash as a kind of plant to include in the palette of shade trees that we're considering. Maybe we can bring it back in another 20, 50 years, but let's see how this is playing out. We're still in first inning here. Now, biological controls are a very attractive kind of option that is considered because if there are natural enemies that might be able to suppress this insect, this can be a long-term and perhaps permanent kind of solution. And there are some kinds of insects that have been found that are attacking emerald ash borer in Asia, and these have been evaluated by federal agencies, and some of these are being introduced and have been introduced already into Colorado. So there's various kinds of wasps that attack eggs of emerald ash borer or lay their eggs underneath the bark and attack young developing larvae of emerald ash borer. And these, again, are part of the reason why emerald ash borer is not an issue in Asia. In Asia, you have a robust complement of these natural enemies, plus you have resistant ash trees. Here, we don't have resistant ash trees. We just have, we hope, the ability to introduce some of these natural enemies, which is in progress. I think that most of the thinking on what these biocontrol agents are going to be useful for is that they will help us suppress emerald ash borer after we go through the wave of tree death that will result when this thing moves in. When we have far fewer ash, more widely spread, and many of them are maintained, perhaps with some insecticide use, then at this time these biocontrols will further suppress the emerald ash borer in a way so the treatments won't have to be as regularly applied. I don't think anybody thinks that this is going to be the solution for emerald ash borer in North America. We're missing the most important part of the biocontrol of emerald ash borer, and that is the ability of the tree to resist it, the attack by this insect itself. So biocontrols probably will not get us through this peak period, but after that point, when the ash trees that we have been conserved and we're trying to keep them going, then we might get some advantage from this. So I'd say the potential value is minor during outbreaks, perhaps greater after that EAB wave. Host plant resistance is pretty much not applicable. That leaves insecticide treatments. And there are very effective insecticide treatments for emerald ash borer. These have to be applied on an individual tree basis, and these are not cheap. But when people ask, can I control emerald ash borer? Then yes, the answer is you can control emerald ash borer on an individual tree basis by some of these insecticide treatments. Can we control emerald ash borer in a broad sense in terms of stopping this invasive species and turning it back? No. But on an individual tree, we can control them. And furthermore, another important thing to consider in terms of these controls that have been developed for emerald ash borer is that these controls can allow trees to recover even if EAB has been working the tree for several years. These kind of treatments that we have can turn around a tree. So it's not a situation such as, say, Dutch elm disease, where once the plant has been affected by, in that case, the fungus, the tree will continue to die and decline and die, and the approach is to prevent that from ever happening, from the tree ever getting infested in the first place. Emerald ash borer works differently. It produces a progressive kind of injury, and the injury is reversible up to a point. So present controls can allow trees to recover if the amount of dieback that emerald ash borer has produced is not more than 30 to 50%. So if it's produced some dieback but not more than 30 to 50%, then emerald ash borer can be managed and the trees can recover. So this is what we're talking about. This in these pictures, all the damage that is indicated here is associated with emerald ash borer. In this part of the country, may also thinning of the crown associated with other things, but even up to 50% thinning associated with emerald ash borer, you could use some of the treatments that are available now to then bring it back. However, it's beyond that. Then there's probably been so much damage, so much compromising of the tissue underneath the bark, that the systemic insecticides, which is what we use in this application, cannot move efficiently and cannot allow the tree to recover. So the treatments that have been developed for emerald ash borer are different than what we consider for most other kinds of wood borers. All of them are systemic insecticides. This is not an insect that is generally even considered to be controlled by the standard approach of spraying the trunk, spraying the branches during egg laying, egg hatch. And that's because that would require spraying the entire tree, often a couple of times. And as it turns out, for this insect, some systemic applications of insecticides have proved to be more effective and avoid the problems of having to spray a tree with all the attendant issues associated with that, such as drift. So we have various kinds of emerald ash borer control options with systemic insecticides that include soil applications. There is a trunk spray that can be used, and there are trunk injections that have to be introduced through a drilled hole. But these all can work for emerald ash borer. And the targets for this insect, when you're using these systemic insecticides, are actually two different life stages. Remember, the adult of the emerald ash borer feeds on the leaves for maybe a couple of weeks after it emerges, before it then goes about laying eggs. And then the eggs are laid on the surface, and the larvae hatch from those eggs and then move in. And if we can get an insecticide that is moving into the phloem and cambium tissues of the plant, we can target that stage as well. So the 4 products that are presently on the market involve 2 kinds of insecticides in the neonicotinoid class. One is imidacloprid, goes under a lot of trade names: Merit, Zytec, Criterion, a lot of over-the-counter products now that you can find in garden centers for homeowners. Dinotefuran, Safari, Xylam, Transdect, a product called emamectin benzoate, that has to be trunk injected, and azadirachtin, a natural product that also needs trunk injection for it to be effective for emerald ash borer. So the soil treatment options for emerald ash borer involve mostly imidacloprid. This is the cheapest product to be used for this insect. It is the most widely available, including over-the-counter products that you can find. So it is applied as a drench, or less commonly as an injection, but imidacloprid is usually applied as a soil drench. And again, there are multiple over-the-counter formulations of this product, unlike the other products. The primary application would be this soil application. So it would be used to get into the root system of the plant, so it would then be able to move into the plant. It takes a few weeks for this to move throughout the plant, because the insecticide is not highly water soluble and highly mobile in the plant, but 2 or 3 weeks it's moved into the foliage after you've applied it to the root system. And there are different ways of applying these soil applied insecticides. Historically, many times they've been injected into the soil, and that can work very well. Indicated here on the right, I say no here, but indicated on the right, that's a very effective way to use it. And you would inject a certain amount of the product over an area underneath the drip line of the tree where you expect the roots to then be able to pick it up. As it turns out, however, you could also just apply it as a drench around the base of the tree. Originally, applications of these soil-applied systemic insecticides did involve a kind of a grid pattern under the drip line, but as it turns out, and when you think about it, there are plenty of roots just at the base of the tree, and since the product is going to be taken up by roots, that's what we want it to happen, to be taken up by the roots. However we get into the root system is going to give us that effect. So here's the little root system at the base of the tree, plenty of fine feeder roots, and if we can mix the appropriate amount of these insecticides and then apply them to the base of the tree, then it can be taken up, again, 2 to 3 weeks for it to get up into the foliage, but this is a very effective and very easy way to apply these. Injection can be very useful, particularly if you need to bypass a mulch or a fabric barrier. They also can prevent the presence of surface applied surface residues of the insecticide, if that's a further concern. So either a drench or a soil injection is how we'd use imidacloprid. That being said, one site where we do not want to use these kinds of treatments are if they are going to be accessible to the roots of flowering plants that are going to be used by desirable species, notably pollinators. So in this picture in the upper right, excuse me, in the upper left, is a ash tree that is growing in a area that has lots of flowering plants around the base. Were you to use a soil drench at the base of this tree, then all of those flowering plants would subsequently be picking up residues of this insecticide that then could be translocated into the nectar and pollen and cause potential hazard to pollinating species. So if that's the situation, you need a plan B. And there are plan Bs, and there's a plan C. Another insecticide that can be used as a soil drench is the other neonicotinoid insecticide, dinotefuran. Goes under trade names such as Safari, Xylam Transdect. Does not have an over-the-counter formulation that homeowners can easily access. This is a more expensive product. It can be used as a soil drench. It works more rapidly. It is more water soluble and more mobile in plants, so it can go into the plant quite rapidly through this kind of application, but it also doesn't persist as long. However, dinotefuran has another kind of potential use in terms of managing emerald ash borer, and that is using it as a spray on the trunk above ground. You're not applying it to the roots, you're not injecting it into the plant, you are spraying it on the lower trunk. And this is the only product that can be used in this manner. for control of emerald ash borer. And the reason it can be used in this way is related to aspects of its chemical activity. One of the things that is different about dinotefuran, this Safari Xylam Transdect, is it is a product that is highly water soluble, much more water soluble than the other systemic insecticides that we have presently available, as are indicated here. The other systemic insecticides that are presently available, clothianidin, imidacloprid, acetamiprid, thiamethoxam, far lower water solubility, and they also differ in another aspect. KOC value. That's a measure of how tightly these compounds tend to bind to organic matter, and something that binds to organic matter will be less likely to move into the plant. And as we can see, dinotefuran has a very low KOC value, which makes it more mobile. So that's why this product, unlike the other systemic insecticides, can be used as a trunk spray. So a basal trunk spray of dinotefuran enters the tree through thin areas of the bark, can usually be expected to reach peak levels in the foliage in about 2 to 3 weeks. Often it is suggested to use an adjuvant, some sort of wetting agent. However, information that I've seen indicates that it probably doesn't help all that much. You can put it on, it's certainly not going to hurt, but it also may not be necessary as well. Then there are trunk injections. Some of the kinds of insecticides that we have that are used for emerald ash borer, and could be used for some other borers as well, have to be injected into the plant. They can't be used effectively as a soil systemic application or as a trunk spray. So they have to be injected into the tree, which involves a drilling of some sort of hole and then introducing the insecticide through some method. The imidacloprid can be trunk injected for emerald ash borer control. So can dinotefuran, but that's not their niche. These trunk injections do involve more expense, and they do involve some experience and technique to allow them to be effectively used. But it does allow us to use a couple of insecticides that can be quite effective for this insect. Most notably, and what's been used most often, is what's called emamectin benzoate. And this goes under the trade name Triage. There are some generics now coming onto the market. And this is injected through various kinds of systems and can provide often control of emerald ash borer for 2, perhaps even 3 years at the rates that are currently labeled. The other insecticide that has to be trunk injected, that has had quite a bit of traction in terms of use so far in Colorado, is azadirachtin. This is a natural product. This is the active ingredient that you get when you extract the crushed neem seed material. Neem coming from the neem tree. Anyway, azadirachtin works on various kinds of insects through interrupting how they normally develop, and used as a trunk injection, it can also effectively control emerald ash borer. Regardless of what kind of product we use in trunk injection, there are some wounding issues that are of concern. Again, there is a wound produced if you go with these 2 trunk injection systems. Regardless of what kind of systemic insecticide you use, all of them are going to move in the plant as the plant respires, and all systemics are going to need water. Even if they're trunk injected, the roots have to be taking up water so they can translocate the systemic insecticide in the plant, and these insecticides will be moved most rapidly if the plant is actively respiring with lots of activity in the leaves. Very little movement, if any, when the plant is dormant. There's no good reason to normally apply these kinds of insecticides to a dormant plant, since it's not going to move into the plant at that time. But when they're actively respiring, particularly if there's adequate moisture in the root system, then there can be optimal uptake. So the conditions to optimize the uptake of a systemic insecticide in a tree is you need soil moist, not saturated, not too moist, but moist. Soil temperature has to be above about 45 degrees so the plant can be active. And ambient air temperatures are between 40 and 90 degrees. The When it gets too hot, trees shut down and they stop respiring. They close the stomates. It gets too cold. There's not going to be a lot of respiratory activity. In other words, these applications are going to be moving optimally in the plant when conditions are most favorable for transpiration of the plant. So again, with emerald ash borer, we have a suite of control options that are pretty different from what we have with the other kinds of wood boring insects. Some of these can also be applied to other wood borers, notably the trunk injections could be used to control most other wood borers, although they are an expensive alternative, considerably more expensive than the trunk sprays that can work for most other borers other than the emerald ash borer. Anyway, this is the most important single species of wood damaging insect in the urban forest that we are presently seeing in North America, and it is one that we will have to deal with for quite a long time in the future as the effect of this invasive species unfolds.